I was asked to talk about the 1993 Martin Groves Dogman case. I normally wouldn't talk about a topic like this because I generally prefer to begin with a bottom-up approach, where I can say with much greater certainty that we know certain paranormal phenomena exist because we have X evidence or a scientific paper to back it up. Since I can't do that here, the best I can do is make the argument that since easily categorized paranormal events have been verified in controlled laboratory conditions, it is quite conceivable that there are paranormal phenomena that happen outside the lab that are not easily categorized. So this video is significantly different than what I would normally make and does involve a bit of my own speculation. With that in mind, I would encourage you to look at anything relating to this topic critically. I've tried my best to separate fact from fiction in regards to the alleged LBL camper attack on the family of four, but I've noticed that a significant amount of people thought I was just being closed-minded and ignorant. So I feel the need to explain the reason that I look into the topic of the paranormal in the first place, and that is because science is constantly changing with new information about the world. Likewise, if we refuse to look critically at information, we can mislead ourselves into thinking all sorts of things are true when they are obviously not. You may have to entertain the possibility that people are being honest, and what they are really seeing are things that are not easily explained. I also need to say that the amount of information that we can get from one perspective of one incident is inherently limiting. I believe Martin Groves has said something to the effect that there are a lot of people like him who hold small pieces of a larger puzzle. He has also said that he has done a lot of research after his 1993 encounter. Naturally, when something unexplainable happens to you, you tend to want answers. If we want more than one perspective, though, we quickly run into problems. Martin Groves talks about meeting a bowhunter in 1993 who was killed not long after they met by a dogman. In comparison, Mark Maychek talks about a bowhunter who was killed by a dogman in 2007. When Mark was being interviewed about this, he seemed to acknowledge that there was a second attack on a bowhunter, but he didn't go into any details. This seems to imply that a second attack happened in 2007 or later. So we have two very conflicting stories about a bowhunter's death, and neither of these two people give any evidence that would support their own story or disprove the other person's story. Mark Maychek said that there was news coverage of the bowhunter's death that happened in 2007. I searched for these news stories that would hopefully confirm this, but I did not find them. I also tried to email Mark to clarify some things, but he has not responded. So I think I did my due diligence here, and with all the evidence that I have, it seems that Mark Maychek's story is less credible and convincing than Martin Groves' version. I've watched multiple interviews of Martin Groves, and in all of them it is clear to me that he is being genuine and honest about what he saw. Perhaps more importantly, Martin Groves has had another dogman encounter with his close friend Daryl Denton. I believe that this also adds to Martin's credibility because he has someone publicly stating that he and Martin saw the same anomalous sort of thing. Some people would say that since Martin was in law enforcement, that also adds to his credibility, and I would say that that is the appeal to authority fallacy. I want to mention two things that I think are important before diving into what Martin Groves says. Tim Coonbo Baker states that Mark Maychek has only found one story in the media about the attack on the bowhunter. Mr. Baker also states that the attack on the bowhunter happened fairly early, like 2001 or 2002. And that he gets his facts from a law enforcement officer who was on duty at the time. Obviously, Mr. Coonbo Baker and Mr. Mark Maychek's stories do not line up. He also mentions that the spread of the claws on the victim was similar to a bear's, but the angle of the claw was different. What is interesting to me is that I can find one news story that mentions a missing man found dead in the LBL area during the 2000s. Let's say Mark Maychek read the same news story I did and simply misremembered the year that the event occurred. The news story was published in 2005 and mentions an uncertain cause of death and the use of dogs to find the body. These two published details seem to match up with the two details Mark Maychek mentioned. It appears to me that Mark Maychek and Mr. Coonbo Baker may have fragments of truth in what they have said, but I would certainly not take what they say as the gospel truth. For example, the idea that Dogman attacks people who wear too much cologne comes from Mr. Coonbo's version of the attack on the family of four. The idea that a supernatural animal would attack someone solely for the reason that they are wearing a lot of cologne is oversimplistic to say the least. Dogmen have been seen eating roadkill, so it seems much more likely that one would attack out of hunger or predatory instinct instead of disapproval for your cologne. The second thing I want to say is that Jesse Doyle of Hellbent Holler YouTube channel has done some great on-the-ground research and found out some interesting things. Most people think that a specific site used to be an RV park, and that was where a family of 4 was attacked. In reality, that area was not an RV park, but instead a TVA work camp. However, there was an RV camp that was abruptly shut down in 1982 and intentionally destroyed. This included cutting the power poles down at the bases. This seems to suggest that something did happen in 1982. What exactly happened, though, is still uncertain. All the physical evidence that we have is the destruction of an RV campsite, and that doesn't necessarily suggest that a supernatural attack happened. For example, a nameless vandal that was angry that his family's land was taken away by the Tennessee Valley Authority may have decided to irreparably damage the campsite out of spite. For Martin Grove's 1993 encounter itself, I will have to abbreviate it somewhat because it would take so long to tell you all the details. I will list the video sources and the finer details in my notes at the end of this video. It goes like this. Martin and his partner from law enforcement, who Martin refers to as Harry, are very good friends. Harry is not his real name, and Martin uses that name to protect the identity of his partner's family. Harry and Martin went to do some camping and turkey hunting in the land between the lakes. They set up camp, they go their separate ways during the day, and start hunting for turkey. Martin walks around a lot and takes a break near a logging road to have a snack and some water. A truck comes down the road and the person inside is also a hunter. He stops and talks to Martin for a substantial amount of time. During this talk, this hunter talks about himself and mentions that he is using a bow to hunt for turkeys. As the bow hunter gets ready to leave, he mentions that Martin should be careful because this bow hunter has had something come around his camp at night. It stayed just outside the light of his fire, so he could not see what it was. Meanwhile, while Harry is hunting, he notices that something is throwing things at him from the concealment of the natural surroundings. One of the things that was thrown at him was a corn cob that had about half the corn left on it. Harry realizes it would require something very, very strong to throw this corn cob with the speed and distance that it had. Harry also sees 2 orbs in the sky that fly over his shoulder, and he hears a metallic sound once. This is quite unsettling to Harry, so he decides to go back to camp. Meanwhile, Martin is also experiencing some strange things on his way back to camp. He sees some things walking alongside him, and he's starting to hear whistles. The things walking alongside him stop when he stops and continue walking when he does. He sees a tall humanoid creature that he describes as like a man wearing a ghillie suit. Martin also hears a loud metallic sound twice. Fast forward a bit, and both Martin and Harry are in camp now. They start talking about the strange things that happened to both of them, and it's quiet for a while now. However, they notice that objects are being thrown at their camp, and they see something glowing next to a tree, like someone is standing behind it smoking a cigarette. Now, even though someone thought at the time something looked like a man in a ghillie suit, or something looked like a man behind a tree smoking a cigarette, neither of these things were actually true. Harry and Martin were the only 2 humans at the campsite that night. They defaulted to what seemed like rational explanations for what they were seeing. Such attempts fell short, though, because what was happening was so far removed from what they knew about the world. Back to the story. They shout and tell whoever is behind the tree to come out, and there is no response. Then a large rock is thrown at them and lands in front of them. Both of them start screaming, then they hear a very visceral and terrifying growl that starts to physically affect them and basically incapacitates them. A bipedal wolf-like creature that is 6 or 7 feet tall comes forward and has a piece of meat in its left paw. The best way to describe this creature would be to say that it is evil and werewolf-like. Most people familiar today with these wolf-like or dog-like creatures tend to call them dogmen, but a lot of regular people who don't know anything about them would default to the term werewolves. Martin couldn't really do anything at this point other than pray mentally, and as he prayed, he began to get free of whatever was affecting him. And at some point, the Dogman communicated to Martin telepathically. The praying continued to the point at which he could move, and naturally he pulled out his handgun and pointed it at the Dogman. Once he made the decision to fire, it was not really clear where the Dogman went or what exactly happened to it. Harry also shot twice with his double-barrel shotgun. Harry grabs some things and then takes off running for the pickup. Martin realizes he'd better get going too. Once they both make it to the pickup, Harry gets in the cab and Martin jumps in the bed of the truck. Once Harry turns on the truck and the headlights turn on, they see two Bigfoot-looking creatures, one large and one smaller. Both of the creatures look malicious and evil. Looking back on it now, both Martin and his close friend Daryl Denton, who was not there at the time, believe that these creatures may not have been your standard Bigfoot. Martin says that the Gugwai are very different in their facial features, teeth, and behavior than the standard Bigfoot. Gugwai are much more violent and have much more of a baboon-like snout compared to Bigfoot. The name Gugwai was given to it by Native Americans, and it means face eater or head eater. So Harry drives off as fast as he can, and in doing so he hits one of the Dogmen, which leaves claw marks on the side of the truck. Later, Martin has to convince Harry to go to a ranger station so that they can report what they saw. During this, they are generally antagonized and threatened by the person in charge of that ranger station. Martin talks to some law enforcement folks he knows and finds out that the bow hunter he talked to yesterday was discovered dead by two other turkey hunters. The bow hunter was pulled out of his tent, predated on, and torn to shreds. If we look at only Martin's perspective of this, we would conclude multiple things. That there is some government effort to cover up such paranormal events, that the Dogmen are quite intelligent, that the Dogmen are paranormal, and they have the ability to speak with you telepathically, and that the Dogmen have the intent and the ability to kill and eat people. Now, like I said before, Martin is quite credible in my view, but we still only have one perspective of this event in 1993. Martin's partner has passed away, and none of the people who were there at the ranger station, or the hunters who found the bow hunter's body, have publicly come forward. Or I should say more specifically, at least as far as I know, none of these people have come forward. So our ability to try to verify this event and find out further details is severely limited. I would like to also say that I'm going to continue with research into the paranormal, and it may be possible for me in the future to find out some more details through unconventional but less definite methods. In the here and now, though, we have much more questions than we have answers. One of the questions would be, what is the meaning of the metallic sounds that were heard? Martin knows about the one missing 411 case, where a hunter went missing and a strange sound was heard there as well, so Martin thinks that there might be a connection. I should mention that the metallic sound mentioned by Martin Groves was described as like a metallic door scraping against something like rock. In comparison, the sound heard in the missing 411 case of Tom Messick sounded something like snapping or a cracking noise, sort of like a big trap closing. There really isn't any striking similarity between these two sounds. I would say that the sounds themselves are probably not what is actually special. What is special is that they are unexplained, out of the ordinary, and related to deeply bizarre and strange events. A metallic sound is something that is not common for Dogman encounters, so I do not think that there is a specific and direct link between the sound and the Dogman. It could be the case that either the Gugwai or the Bigfoot, whatever they were, are capable of creating the sound and decided to make it in an attempt to distract Martin and Harry. It might also be the case that there was a third party there that was inhuman and unnoticed by Martin or Harry. Let's say that there was a bystander, entity, or creature that tried to make its presence known or tried to warn Martin or Harry of the impending danger with this metallic sound. If this is the case, this bystander may have also helped free Martin and Harry from the physically and mentally restraining effects of the Dogman's growl. Now we have to ask the question, why are the Dogmen here and how are they getting here? Let's say they come from some sort of different dimension or world and they need some sort of method of getting here. It may be the case that they are exploiting the portal technology of a different species to get here. If they are not entirely sure of how it works, that would explain why they can't stay here for extended periods. I'm also going to assume that Dogmen don't have the technical know-how to build such a device themselves. Dogmen are reported to eat roadkill and go around intentionally scaring people seemingly without reason. That is not something that you would expect from a very intelligent creature that has the technical know-how to build a portal. Also, they don't seem to carry any kind of technology with them. Remember how humans sent dogs into space to tell if it was actually safe? It is possible that dogmen are being treated as disposable creatures by another species that does not want to risk anything by personally appearing or manifesting in our world or dimension. Martin Groves has noticed that there is a connection between Dogmen and cemeteries. He also mentions that, for whatever reason, they seem to be more predominant around Catholic cemeteries specifically, yet they do not seem to walk directly through Catholic cemeteries. Instead, they try to walk around the edges. The first thing I think of when I hear that is that they might not walk through Catholic cemeteries in particular because they might dislike hallowed ground. This sort of makes sense when you think about them more broadly as being negative and malevolent creatures. Let's say that they don't like hallowed ground. Why would it be the case that they are drawn to places that have it, like Catholic cemeteries? As intelligent creatures, they may have curiosity that may lead them to investigate things that they might not like or understand. We might also consider that dogmen are a sort of creature that naturally has the ability to materialize or manifest for limited amounts of time, perhaps only in certain areas. Or it might be that they are exploiting specific weaknesses in the barriers between dimensions. You have to remember as well that you are not allowed to carry firearms into the land between the lakes area, and even if you did have a firearm, the effectiveness of bullets on dogmen seems to be somewhat questionable. Since we have no idea exactly what they are, we can't really determine what would be a good method of defense. Martin Groves says that 11 people have been killed in animal attacks into Mumber's Bay since 1965. Even if you don't think dogmen are responsible for these attacks, it's clear that some kind of animal or animals are causing human fatalities. Anytime you step into an area where there are wild animals, you have to accept that there is some level of risk in doing so, and this is especially true if there are a lot of snakes in that area. Finally, I would like to remind you that before we had science to explain strange events like lightning strikes or disease, people just attributed the cause to magic. Even Einstein referred to quantum entanglement as spooky action at a distance before he could really understand and accept what it was. So we may not understand certain things that are strange now, but it's very likely that we will eventually have scientific explanations for them in the future. And these are my notes.